Well, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to have everyone on this call to launch the Conservative Group for Europe's paper, where we wanted to provide a very early opportunity as we head towards January 2021 to look at what the foreign affairs field will look like for global Britain as we go forward, bearing in mind all that's happened during the course of this year, not least, of course, the pandemic and the consequences of that, but also to recognise the changing circumstances in the United States and a world which looks no easier than it did when the decision was made to leave the European Union. And now as we get close to that finality, what sort of world it is out there. And the Conservative Group for Europe wanted to do that under the leadership and guidance of our chair, who has just arrived on the video. David, we've just started, and I'm just starting on the introductions.
Excellent.
So what I thought I'd do, let me carry on for a couple of minutes while you get your bearings. And
no, that's fine, Alistair. You carry on. I've been sitting waiting. The usual technology problems, Zooms, and so on. Anyway, you carry on.
All right. That's fine. Well, we have a seriously good panel who I'll introduce in just a second in order to speak. But just let me run through the technicalities, although most of us are used to the webinar format by now. You'll all have a Q&A function. Any questions you want to raise, go to that, and then I'll be able to call people when we get to the question and answer session after all our panelists have spoken. We're fairly restricted on time. It will be a tight hour. So as usual, concise questions, and I'll call your questions. You will get a chance to put your questions in an audio form, but if you write them out in advance, then we'll know who to call and we can take it from there. In the meantime, everybody will be muted, and only the video of those people who will be speaking and addressing will be up there at the time. We have all got bedazzled by the galleries over the past 9 months or so, so we'll try and cut down the reason for that. We do have a number of people joining us from the diplomatic community. I'd just like to say a very warm thank you to them and a welcome to them. I suppose because of the circumstances of last week and the election, this is probably the first opportunity any significant panel in the UK has had to discuss how British foreign policy should move on in the light of what is now a Biden presidency, as opposed to who would win the election. So it gives us an early opportunity to do that. And that, I hope, will mix with the rest of the paper and the ideas that we've brought forward. Essentially, the paper was designed to be a handy guide to anyone, to Conservative members of Parliament, members of the Conservative Party, but anyway, more broadly, just to see how the Conservative Group looked ahead at what we thought the world was facing, to have a sense that a good partnership with Europe, with the European Union, and now we're no longer a part of it, is still very much in the UK's interests, particularly in foreign affairs, and to look at various parts of the world in that light. Now, before I introduce those who are the panelists, can I invite David Lidington, our chair, just to say a few words of introduction on behalf of the Conservative Group for Europe.
Thanks very much indeed, Alistair. I think it's a very important meeting and webinar, and it's great that we've got three extremely knowledgeable and distinguished commentators to lead our discussion. It is indeed apposite that the paper that Alistair has led, and to which a number of CGE members have contributed, should be published at a time when we're taking stock of the outcome of the US elections. When I was elected as chair of the CGE earlier this year, I made it clear, so nobody could be under any illusions about it, that we had as a group to look beyond 31st of December this year, that we had to move on from any sort of retrospectives about 2016 and what might have happened if the referendum had had a different outcome, and focus upon the relationship that we wish the United Kingdom to have with the other democracies of Europe, including with the institutions of the European Union, over the years to come, and how we might seek to advocate a strategic relationship and partnership between ourselves and our European friends and neighbours. We have, we'll say a little bit at the end, a programme of meetings with people from the centre-right in many different European countries, and I'm really pleased that Neale is taking part in our discussion this afternoon. So that is the way I see the group moving forward. We have to be thought leaders in stimulating discussion within the Conservative Party and family about our relationship with the mainstream centre-right in the rest of Europe, and with how our relationships with European democracies fit into our broader concepts about the United Kingdom's interests and alliances worldwide. Alistair, hand back to you, because you've done so much work on this paper.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me just introduce very briefly our panellists in the order in which they'll speak. William Hague needs, of course, no introduction, former leader of the Conservative Party, former Foreign Secretary, and an authoritative voice on foreign affairs, as he has been on so many other matters over the course of his career. To Neale Richmond, and Neale is a Fine Gael Member of Parliament, spokesman on European affairs. Neale has taken a particular interest in the impact of Brexit on Ireland, but also he's been very widely quoted recently with his view on Ireland and European affairs, the relationship with the United Kingdom, and can give a distinctive European Union perspective on where foreign policy is going in the future and issues facing all of us. And Tom Tugendhat is the Select Committee Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Tom has also made a strong name for himself recently in relation to human rights issues, particularly in China. But Tom has a very wide-ranging brief in relation to foreign affairs matters, has already made himself a distinguished member of the House of Commons at a very early stage in his career, and is an authoritative voice on behalf of Parliament in global affairs. So if I could invite William just to kick off, using our paper as a background, and give a few minutes introduction to global affairs post-2021.
Well, thank you very much, David and Alistair. It's a pleasure to join in with this and to welcome the paper from Conservative Group for Europe, which I think is full of extremely positive and constructive proposals. It is a good moment to have this discussion, as Alistair has said, the moment within a few days of knowing there will be a new president of the United States, and with Brexit coming up, and with British chairmanship of the G7 and COP26 coming up next year, this is a good moment. It's still a difficult time in many ways for members of the Conservative family on these issues. In the House of Lords 2 nights ago, it was the first time I'd voted against the legislation of the Conservative government for 31 years. On the internal market bill. So we're still having our differences and struggles about issues relating to Brexit, but it's a good time to think of constructive policies for the future together. A few minutes from me on that global scene and British foreign policy post-Brexit with the new US administration. To me, there are 4 main themes here. There should be 4 fixtures of a British foreign policy for a global Britain. And the first fixture is to increase the ability of Western democracies to withstand future threats. That is about so many things, about having a coherent cyber power strategy together with other countries, about having common approaches to investment from China. An important bill has been published by the British government today. Common policies with other democracies on issues like Huawei, NATO being able to respond to hybrid warfare threats, and of course close cooperation with the United States. And the commitment of President-elect Biden to try to bring together global democracies in a conference or coalition is now an extremely important factor for the UK to work with. Joe Biden has mentioned 3 elements to that coalition of democracies. They are fighting corruption, defending against authoritarianism, and advancing human rights. And the UK has a lot to offer on all of those issues. We can be working with other democracies on how we protect freedom of speech in universities, for instance. We can be advancing human rights through coordination on sanctions, Magnitsky-style sanctions. We can be asking the United States to join us in an issue dear to my heart of supporting creating an international body to collect evidence of conflict-related sexual violence so that prosecutions can be advanced around the world. So this whole ability of Western democracy to protect itself is my first major theme. The second is connected to that, to advance crucial global issues: climate change, the state of the oceans, loss of biodiversity, preventing future pandemics. Here the UK, hosting COP26, is in a very important position. And here I think there does need to be a framework of cooperation with China. Despite a lot of rivalry with China and differences with China over Hong Kong, for instance, there nevertheless has to be a global framework of Western nations working together with China. And in the coming year, with China hosting the Conference on Biodiversity and us hosting the Climate Change Conference, there is a major inflection point for there to be collaboration between the two countries on global issues. The third fixture of British foreign policy in the next few years, to me, should be one we're familiar with: to be utterly committed to a world based on law. That's why the differences we had in the House of Lords the other night were important. We are a country that has a particularly strong interest in law being paramount around the world. We are very exposed. We're the 6th largest economy in the world and the 3rd largest outward investor in the world. We are, in normal times, have a couple of million of our citizens somewhere out there in the world. And we rely on law to protect all of these things. And so we should be heavily invested in the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the International Criminal Court, as we are, and making sure that law means something to people who are often distant from it, that law means something in a bold vision for the political and social and economic empowerment of women around the world in the coming decades. And I think to assist with all of these things, we have to have a strong British network around the world. In the days when David and Alistair and I were at the Foreign Office, we pushed forward the Canning agenda to open new embassies in Latin America and did a similar thing in Southeast Asia. And British physical presence and energy around the world is crucial in making sure there is a vision of a global Britain. And my fourth theme, which is particularly relevant to some of the ideas in the paper, is to be heavily engaged in the security and stability of our own neighborhood. We are leaving the European Union, but we are not physically, of course, going anywhere at all. And there are many things for which we rely on NATO. Our adversarial relationship with Russia requires a strong NATO. But there are many other aspects to European security. Stability in the Western Balkans, terrorism across the Sahel in North Africa. And on these and other issues, British diplomacy is needed. British troops are sometimes needed. European security in the coming years will throw up some new challenges that are not anticipated today. This requires a formal framework of cooperation with the European Union, in my view, without any prejudice or diminution in Britain's freedom to act and its sovereignty in foreign policy post-Brexit. We do need to be able to respond to threats together, which requires exchanges of information, being able to plan together, the United Kingdom to be able to participate in CSDP missions of the European Union without being under any requirement to do so. And my view is that requires some formal structures to be adopted, such as ideas of British permanent observer status at the Political and Security Committee of the EU. It requires a regular structure of meetings between Britain's foreign and defence secretaries with counterparts in the European Union. It ought to mean a framework participation agreement which allows for the exchange of intelligence and military planning between the UK and the European Union. It is total common sense for us to join in the security of our own neighbourhood, as it is for any household or any nation anywhere in the world. And so those are my 4 parts of a British foreign policy for a global Britain. And I hope that is food for thought. Happy to answer any questions later.
Thank you, William, very much indeed. Certainly food for thought, beautifully presented, nice and concise, with things for us all to work on. CGE is really delighted to welcome Neale Richmond to join us. Neale, you're enormously welcome. A friend of the United Kingdom, a friend of the European Union, very trenchant thoughts on where the world should go. And this is an opportunity for you to link those thoughts as to what you think are the global challenges facing us post-January, with the UK no longer being a member of the European Union, but still very much a member of Europe, and how you see things going forward. And we're delighted to welcome you to give us some thoughts this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Alistair, and it's a real privilege not just to join this webinar, but to share the platform with so many distinguished politicians. I feel a little bit out of place, but I'll try my best not to embarrass the family. This paper is excellent, may I start off with, and when I see contributors like Charles Tannock and Garvin Walsh, I'm not surprised. And I'm really, really delighted to have had the opportunity to go through it in some detail. Simon sent it on, and I'm not going to talk about Britain's place in the world. It's not my place to talk about it. I'm equally not going to talk about the Conservative Party's place in world politics, but I do want to provide some reflections based on the paper a bit closer to home. And obviously the second section of this paper focuses on the relationship with Europe. And I use that in the wider context. Like William said, the UK is leaving the European Union. It's not leaving Europe. And geography won't allow that. So I wanted to divide my brief remarks here into 2 sections. The more general European approach, I am a proud European and remain so, and then specific Irish approach. And as I speak about the European context, I see David McAllister MEP has joined the call, Vice President of the European People's Party and a dear friend of all of ours. And it reminded me, Alistair, the last time we met in person was in Dublin, where you very kindly gave me your last EPP-ED group pen at a joint committee of the European Affairs from the Oireachtas and Brexit Committee, and we had a great chat. But I suppose, even though the UK has left the EU, it's not leaving Europe, and we have to see how that relationship can develop. And the paper throws up a few questions and a few suggestions. And the main thing is, we look at the common purpose, it's still the same. Tom has done great work on Hong Kong. Ireland has obviously suspended our extradition treaty with Hong Kong as well. But beyond that, we've all spoken at length about the appalling situation in Belarus, further afield into places like Venezuela, and equally respecting the rule of law and democracy in the USA, our most vital of ally, where there is still discussion and debate about that result. But I think there is a uniformity of opinion there that needs to be stressed and can be stressed. And we look at the platforms that are available to the UK to work with the EU and the wider European family. That's where there needs to be a continued focus. So I'm talking about the OSCE, I'm talking about the Council of Europe, and even though it's not relevant to Ireland, I am of course talking about NATO, as William referred to. But then beyond the national structure, looking at the party structures, I've just come off a call with Simon Coveney. David, he sends his best, and that was with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, the Hans Seidel Stiftung, the Robert Schuman Foundation, the Michael Collins Institute here in Ireland, and indeed this august body here. It's making sure that we still have that conservative influence in our conservative and Christian democratic family on the widest European basis. And I look to friends and partners in places like Norway and Iceland, as well as the accession countries, like Serbia, and how much they can still contribute, and how, for the first time, someone's leaving the EU, but how do we retain their influence over those European structures? And one key area is in that of COSAC, where all our European affairs committees come together. And there has been some very monumental gatherings of COSAC over recent years, and Bill Cash has been someone who, I don't know if he's going to be missed from the scene, but he's certainly someone who made an impression. But we want to make sure that the UK is continuing to send a delegation from both the House of Commons and the House of Lords, like other accession and observer countries do so, because it is so very important that we keep those conversations and we keep negotiations, is not the word to use, but we always use to work together as much as possible. And that's where I believe that Ireland, and of course I have to be very selfish and talk about the Irish dimension here, but I think Ireland can play a very unique role. In recent days, a lot of people, and perhaps a little bit overzealously, have talked about Ireland's role as the bridge builder between the USA and Europe, and indeed the UK under a Biden administration. There are rows between 13 different townlands in Ireland who are trying to claim Joe Biden as a native son. He'll make his own decision on that, but ultimately he's about to become the president of America and the leader of the free world. But Ireland, more importantly, and far more importantly, has a very important role to play in the EU as the UK's best friend within the EU. And despite some of the rhetoric and some of the nasty comments in the Daily Express about myself and my colleagues, we will be the UK's best friend within the EU. I would argue we are the UK's best friend within the EU through this negotiation process. And we want to make sure that everything is done in order to allow that relationship to continue as strongly as possible. And William rightly referred to the internal market bill. The European position, the Irish position is absolutely clear on that. When we believe in rule of law, we believe in respecting international treaties. And that's the basis, to respect what we've agreed. I would like to think that everyone on this call, not just on the panel, hopes that we can achieve a deal between the EU and the UK, not this week, if not this week, next week. And I think that's certainly a very important basis. But when that future relationship, as thin as it will be, is defined and it goes through David's committee in the European Parliament and it comes through the House of Commons, we have to look about, well, how will the UK work with the EU? And that's where Ireland comes in. Because through the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement, we have an opportunity for Ireland and the UK to have a bilateral relationship like no one else in the EU, a bilateral relationship that's approved from, that's rooted in international law, that's rooted in our shared responsibilities. So what am I talking about? The British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference, of which David chaired so many times in recent years. But beyond that, the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly, which I've joined as a member, the North-South Ministerial Council, the British-Irish Council. Let's formalise it. Why can't we have every European Council meeting being shadowed by a meeting of the British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference? Why can't every COSAC meeting be preceded by a meeting of the relevant committees of the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly? When the UK was a member of the EU, Ireland relied on our common membership so much. They were literally our big brother, who we worked together at various council meetings that the other panelists on this call attended and know how close that relationship was. That relationship can continue to be close and continue that we still pursue the same shared objectives. And it goes beyond the EU. Ireland is about to join the UN Security Council, something we're very excited about in January. Alongside France and the UK will have a very important role to play in a very testing international situation. I referred to the situation in Hong Kong and other places. But closer to home, the direct Anglo-Irish relationship has a very severe responsibility continuing to Northern Ireland. It's absolutely wonderful that we have the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement back up and running, that the Assembly is meeting again, that the Executive, albeit can't agree today on COVID recovery, is still meeting and people are talking. But I was struck, I raised this issue in the Dáil a couple of weeks ago. The terror threat level is still severe in Northern Ireland. Just this summer, we saw the entire Army Council of the new IRA arrested by a cross-border cooperation by the police service in Northern Ireland and our own in Garda Síochána. That won't change on the 1st of January. Well, how we operate that, how we implement the European arrest warrants, how we continue that level of cross-border cooperation and policing, not just to deal with the terrorist threat of domestic terrorists, be they loyalist, nationalist, Republican or unionist, but also international terrorists. And we're reminded about that quite starkly with the events in Vienna and Paris in recent days and weeks. Ireland and the UK continue to have a memorandum of understanding in relation to defence going back to 2015. That's vitally important. Our common travel agreement that dates since 1922 has been legally underscored by another memorandum of understanding. David, I think you were crucial to that negotiation. Those are the key tools. We don't need to reinvent the wheel there. But even though the UK has left the EU, sadly, I'm not going to go over that discussion again, we have to make sure that the UK continues to work hand in hand with the EU and the wider European neighbourhood for all our own benefits. And I absolutely firmly believe the way to achieve that is through Ireland and through the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement. Thank you so much.
Neale, thank you very much indeed. Not only a strong set of opinions, but some practical ideas of keeping us close together, but the same sense that the common challenges we face, United Kingdom, Ireland, European Union, they're the same, and working together really matters. I do remember the visit to Ireland with the Select Committee some time ago, and that meeting. Thank you for reminding me of the EPP. That will end my amnesty with the Conservative Party, I would imagine, if they've all been listening to that. And as for US presidents, well, you claim all the US presidents, as far as I'm aware. Doesn't matter who's elected. They all seem to have come from Ireland originally. So well done on all that. Last panelist before we get on to questions, Tom Tugendhat, chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, a good friend of all of us of the CGE of people internationally. Special day for you today, Tom, of course, Armistice Day, and it's great to have you on the panel.
Well, look, it is a special day, but it's a day that reminds me of what unites us as well, because the project that we saw flourish over the last 7 decades grew out of the failures of various different moments when politicians and leaders completely failed to represent the interests of their people and actually represented instead narrow sectarian views. And so today I don't think should be a day of regret, but a day of hope. And certainly for many of us who served, yes, it's a day of sadness, of course, because you remember those you served with, but it's also a day when you remember the possibility that you were fighting for. Now, I'm very cautious about talking about the European question on this call, not only because William and David and Ali are here and they're all much better at the question than I am, but Neale has been a fantastic friend for a while now. But I've just noticed, I've made the mistake of looking down and seeing who the participants were. Not only is David McAllister on here, but Elmer Brock. So I'm really sorry. I feel completely overwhelmed by the audience list. So instead, I'm going to talk about something completely different. No, I'm not. I'm going to talk about the paper, but I'm going to talk about a different aspect of the paper, if I may, which is the fact that Europe has got to be, I think, for all of us, not an end project, but a stepping stone. Of course, the purpose of Europe is the cooperation and peaceful coexistence of the people of Europe, but it's much more than that, actually. I think the European project, when done well, and by the way, this doesn't just mean with European Union member states, as you'll see from my argument, when the European project is done well, what it's actually doing is it's extending the principles that we share to a wider community. And we know they are principles that are shared by a wider community because we see people choosing to come to Europe, to invest in Europe, to live in a way that we have been espousing for a number of years, and in a way that we're extending wider. And this brings me on to the question of what we can do together. Now, William spoke quite rightly about structured cooperation, something I'm sorry to say, despite my best efforts, the government is showing no greater interest in today than it was a few months ago, or indeed a few years ago when we started publishing reports on it. But there are areas where we can nevertheless, even without structured cooperation, where we can actually look to work together and to invest in defending the institutions and the principles that I think really matter to us and to many around the world. And here I'm particularly thinking of things like World Trade Organization. I'm thinking about the different forms of partnership on the UN bodies and the different ways in which we seek to promote democracy and, as William put it, the rule of law around the world. Now, this is challenging. I'm got to be honest, it is challenging, not just because, of course, working together without a structured fashion, without a structured organization makes it that much harder, but it's challenging because actually the entire world is pulling in various different directions. And we would be wrong if we weren't open to recognizing that even within our own continent, there are some nations, even within the European Union, that appear to be pushing in slightly different directions. So this is where I think that we need to be looking at our partners around the world, the United States, of course, but also countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and looking at ways of reconstructing the energy and vision that some of our ancestors had 70 or 80 years ago. Because I do think there is an opportunity for this to work. Now, this doesn't mean, containing China or channeling China. What this is about is about defending the principles that have actually seen countries, including China, prosper over the last 20 or 30 years. The reality is it wasn't Chinese communism that lifted 850 million people out of poverty. It was the market reforms that the World Trade Organization membership gave them. It was the liberal capitalism, if you'll excuse the term of art, that really did transform China, and that can transform many other parts of the world as well. And so when we argue for the rule of law, and when we argue for democracy, and when we argue for the principles that European, American, if you will, we're actually arguing for basic liberties that we know people share. Now, I was very interested by many parts of this report, but I'm not going to talk about the Americas, but I was going to particularly talk about the African section. And the reason I was interested in the African section was because in many ways, we're back at a moment where the challenge of Africa, where the struggle for the soul of Africa is going to define a huge amount of our future. In the last year or so, in the last 5 years or so, we've seen the impact of the migration of some 5 million or so people from the Middle East after the Syrian disaster. The possible migration routes out of sub-Saharan Africa, should we end up with climate failure, we're talking 50, maybe even 500 million. We're talking extraordinary numbers. And we're also seeing a challenge to the way the world works. We're seeing megacities growing out of very poorly governed places, which could lead to very serious amounts of terrorism, and indeed the sexual violence, sadly, that William has spent so much effort and been so successful in raising the attention of, sadly not yet changing the direction, but at least raising the attention. And we've also got a challenge in the way the world works. Now, this isn't a moral point about Chinese or European ways of governing. It's a simple factual point that what we're seeing in Chinese investment in Africa is buying votes in UN bodies, is changing the impetus in the way that the international structures work, and is going to, if it draws more weight, change the way that we ourselves trade. Because the code that we're seeing written into the infrastructure networks that are being installed is coding in to our lives, our values, our system of trade, commerce, and communication, the norms of a state that we do not share, in the same way as we coded in through French, English, and many other languages into international principles of law, the values that we do hold dear. So when we look at Africa over the next 20, 30 years, this is a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge for us as Europeans to work together. It's a huge challenge for us as liberal Westerners, for want of a better expression. Western, I include Japan as well as the United States there, but Democrats, to see how we can support, help, and encourage prosperity in a part of the world that has traditionally been ignored, because actually it's not just about Africa. This isn't just an act of generosity. This is actually an act of self-defense and making sure that European values that we really do value are seen to prosper and not undermined.
Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate that sentiment, and your work in raising these concerns has been well noted. Thank you for that. Three great panelists have given some really choice views on where we're going in the future. There's only a limited time for questions, and forgive me if I just select who I can to raise them. But I'm first going to Keith Best, a colleague of a number of ours, and for some years, and he's got a specific question. Keith.
Thank you very much, Alistair, and thank you for the excellent contributions so far. William spoke very eloquently of the need to participate fully in international institutions and also look at new ones, and he mentioned specifically the gathering of evidence on sexual violence, with which he knows I've been very interested from my time at Freedom from Torture and other bodies. But I wondered now if is the time to press for a World Environment Authority to encompass existing treaty obligations with perhaps an associated international court for the environment. I chair and have done for many years an international NGO called WFM, the Institute for Global Policy. And we have actually, right from the 1990s, before the International Criminal Court came into being, and I think we were material in ensuring that it did, have hosted the Coalition for the International Criminal Court, about 2,500 NGOs worldwide. And we also host another coalition for the international responsibility to protect as well. So, I mean, we're very interested in coalition building in the NGO sector around trying to press for international institutions which are actually meaningful. I just wonder what people's views might be on that.
Thanks, Keith. Who wants to take that one first? William?
Well, I can try and answer. Absolutely. Thank you, Keith. And I think it's an absolutely pivotal year on environmental matters, and that is coming up, and the Biden administration will be arriving in the nick of time, really, for that. And that's why I was talking about the need for a strong agenda running through the Conference on Biodiversity in China in April and COP26 in the UK at the end of next year. I think it is, while I would be very happy to see the sort of organization and courts that you described, we're probably some way off that. There are many steps to take before that. And we really need a lot of international coordination before we can aspire to that. Many countries would find it, would have all the sorts of normal objections to setting up anything that interfered with their sovereignty on these matters. But there's huge scope here for coordinated international action. In the UK, the environment bill that is going through at the moment is designed to make sure that we stop contributing to deforestation around the world. Well, imagine if China was committed to a policy that was designed to stop deforestation around the world. Imagine the massive impact that would have, or the United States, or both committed to that. And I think those sorts of things are within reach, whereas probably setting up a World Environment Court is not yet within reach. So I would focus on that policy coordination and international agreement at the big conferences next year.
I'm not obliging each panelist to answer on everything for reasons of time, but if you'd like to make a comment on this, just either unmute or just wave a hand, or we'll get on to the next one.
I'll make a very quick comment, which is,
thanks, Tom.
This is one of the things that we've been looking at as a committee for very obvious reasons, with COP26 coming up, what are the environmental cooperation elements we could do. And I have to say, I agree with William. I'd be cautious about creating new superstructures. I think, one of the problems that we've got, and sadly Brexit is a demonstration of this, but actually there are many others around the world, is that supranational organizations are struggling with legitimacy at various different levels. And so finding ways in which popular mandates can cooperate with international action is the challenge. And I think that's where we need to look at sort of softer, if you like, Venn diagrams of collaboration. And I think one on the environment that could certainly include China would be a very good place to go. But I'd be cautious about trying to structure it into too firm a footing.
I'm going to go to Christopher Nash next with a question which is particularly British, but the next one, Neale, I will come to you first for an answer about a wider question. But if Christopher Nash would like to ask his question.
Thank you, Alistair. If the government presses on in the Commons with the Internal Markets Bill, including the clauses that break international law, how will President-elect Biden treat the UK in January 2021 and beyond? Will he wait for a change in Prime Minister, a Conservative Prime Minister, say, in the shorter term, or a Labour Prime Minister in due course before relations can normalise, let alone become special again, or will the current government just get away with it?
Tom or William like to try that?
Well, I wouldn't like to, but I feel I should. I think there's various elements of the US relationship that we've got to be cautious about rolling them into one. There's clearly the defense and security relationship, which endures because it is so fundamentally to the interests of both countries. There's a second relationship, which is one based on the fact that we're extremely open economies. And so if, I don't know the views of everyone here, but frankly, I've never really got terribly excited about the idea of a US trade deal. We are, after all, the kind of people who walk into a rowdy bar with our wallets open and offer to buy everybody a drink. With that kind of an open economy, so open indeed that trade deals, yeah, of course, they make a bit of a difference. But you know, if we're buying everybody a drink, there's no point in nicking our wallets. And so we, you know, I'd be cautious about getting too excited about what may happen there. But on a question of the softer level of cooperation, I mean, many of us have taken a bet, and it's a bet that William hasn't taken, but some of us have. Though we didn't vote, well, I didn't vote, I voted for those particular clauses. I accepted the bill as a whole for the necessity of having a UK internal markets bill afterwards. And the reality was that we got an amendment which was to keep the second element out. Now, it's not, this is a very impure argument I'm making, and I realize that I'm lucky I was trained by Jesuits, otherwise I'd find this argument very difficult to make. But we have effectively hived off different aspects of the bill into different votes. So I suspect that Joe Biden and any US administration will take a pretty stern look at it, and I don't pretend they'll be pleased about it, but I also suspect that they will see it for what it is, which is a rather uncomfortable divorce negotiation being conducted between various parties. And the US government will do what it always does, which is to look at the interests of the US people in any future relationship and see whether or not it wishes to make a fuss out of this or not. You know, for all of we talk about special relationships, or the French talk about the oldest alliance, or the Irish talk about, well, every US president, including Barack Obama, having been Irish. The reality is the US has always been, and quite understandably should be, very focused on the interests of the American people, and that's exactly, I'm sure, what President Biden will do.
Okay.
Well, in the interest of time, very briefly, and I agree with what really the gist of what Tom was saying, it is damaging to this country, in my view, to have these clauses in the internal market bill. That's why I voted against them. And in a way, it's quite an achievement by the government to get Ken Clarke, Michael Howard, and me all voting the same way on a European issue in the House of Lords. It does suggest something's gone a bit wrong. Probably when that happens, or might suggest to a lot of people. And so obviously I think they would be damaging if put into practice with the United States and with other countries and with this country's international standing. The solution, of course, is to have well, one solution is for the government to drop the idea of them, but another solution is to there to be a free trade agreement shortly, next week or very shortly, as Neale was saying. And a good alongside good agreement about how to implement the Northern Ireland Protocol, which makes them completely unnecessary. And that's really got to be the objective, so that neither the United States nor anyone else has to worry about them.
Okay, a wider question now, and I will go to Neale first with it, from Mark Maddell.
Yes, it's a very wide question, but how much difference will President Biden make to the UK, to the EU, and to the world?
I'd love to hear an Irish perspective on this. So Neale, and thank you for joining us, Mark. Really appreciate it.
To be honest, I was all up ready to go studs in on the internal market bill, but look, this will make a huge difference. Joe Biden's commitment for 40 years to multilateralism, to the rule of law, to international engagement is massive for all of us. And it should be welcomed. Even those of us who see ourselves on the centre-right spectrum would have many friends across the Republican Party. The difference in approach to international geopolitics under a Biden presidency compared to what we've had for the last 4 years will be massive, and it will be welcome. My cousin Barry Obama did a great job, and we were very fond of him, Tom, as you rightly said, but we're really excited about Joe Biden, nothing to do with his Irish links, but what he's said and what he's put a huge emphasis on in relation to the sanctity of the Good Friday Agreement. And that's something everyone on this call shares, and that's really important. But the ability for the US to work closer with the EU and closer on a more sovereign basis with the UK than we've seen over the last number of years is crucial for all of us when we tackle wide-scale problems that no one country or no one alliance can can get to grips with, be it climate change, be it human trafficking, be it sexual exploitation, be it all these huge big issues that, you know, they're staring us in the face. And Tom rightly mentioned Africa and the refugee migration crisis and what role we can play. But if we have an interested, engaged, outward-looking president, it makes things so much better. And I'm relishing the 20th of January, to be honest.
Thanks. I'll just keep moving on. We've had more questions than we can possibly get in, but
I'll just sound a very quick word of warning. While
yes,
I agree
Tom.
with everything that Neale said, President Trump had one effect. He forced us to look at ourselves and to look at our own responsibilities. We've got to be careful that President Biden doesn't give us the lie that we can just rest on the American laurels again. We can't. We need to do a lot more ourselves.
Thanks, Tom, and well done for mentioning Barack Obama. I remember the song when he came to Ireland, which was just brilliant. But I am reliably informed on this call that there is at least one recent president that Ireland is not necessarily claiming, so we can move swiftly on. Charles Tannock, and Charles is one of the co-authors of this report, and I will mention the authors at the end, but Charles is well known to all of us and has a particular question.
Thank you, Alistair. Back in February 2017, I wrote a paper called Brexit, the Security Dimension. And of course, as we are rightly focused on the trading and commercial economic issues, little has been thought about in terms of the internal security dimension. I noticed that Neale Richmond mentioned the European arrest warrant. Well, to the best of my knowledge, that will lapse on the 1st of January without an agreement. And that is, it's going to be a very difficult issue to address given the ECJ jurisdiction involved in being part of it. And I am deeply concerned, particularly as we saw the uptick in terrorist attacks in France, the risk of troubles returning to Ireland, that without these tools available to our law and our justice enforcement agencies, security service, the police force, and UK border agencies, that there is a real risk that we are putting our citizens in greater danger. And other than Lord Ricketts, I've seen very little debate in the House of Lords or the House of Commons addressing this and what is going to be done. I understand that there has been a temporary stopgap done to make sure that the Prüm Convention on fingerprints and number plates survives because it's intergovernmental, but all the other ones I mentioned, including the EAW, passenger name records, Schengen information system, the ECRI database for criminal records, all these fall by the wayside without a deal. And I'm just wondering how concerned the panelists are about this and what can be done to make sure that the government puts more focus and energy into addressing that, and not just on the economic and trade aspects of the FTA, hopefully, which will come through in a couple of weeks' time, but may not come through. And then we have the issue of the security cliff edge, which I've alluded to.
Thanks, Charles. We are running very short of time, but we'd like to take on a particular security aspect of that. Neale, do you have a particular view from a European point of view?
Yeah, sorry. This is, in Ireland, one of the biggest concerns. And we had Simon Coveney at our select committee 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he didn't beat about the bush that this is a concern. We have seen over particularly the last few months, the cooperation on a north-south basis, but equally an east-west basis in breaking up, never mind dissident terrorism, but criminality, criminal gangs, really, really nasty organised Irish crime groups who had absconded basically to the UK and were operating out of abandoned farms in Birmingham and places like, or outside Birmingham and places like that. To get a hold of this in a matter of weeks. Now, I have no doubt this is somewhere where there shouldn't be any disagreement. This is just pure common sense, rolling over, maintaining a relationship that has been good for everyone and has been important for everyone. But it does, as Charles rightly points out, rest out on the next couple of days. And when you see people talking about, look, let's leave, no deal, no problem, we'll negotiate a load of mini treaties to look after that. It doesn't work like this. The whole point of the transition period is we have the opportunity to nail down the very key important issues, and that goes beyond quotas and tariffs and goes into these very real issues. And it's a massive concern, and I know the PSNI will continue to work warmly with An Garda Síochána, but we can't say the same about the Met Police with their colleagues in France or the Netherlands, or indeed the Costa del Sol.
I'm going to one wider question now that will give all of you a chance, because we wanted to finish bang on we wanted to finish bang on time. So I'm going to Gerard Fox, please.
Sorry, it was a bit of a long question, but just to summarise it, the idea behind international trade is specialisation and mutual advantage. And when current account imbalances persist for long periods of time, the case for international trade is to some extent undermined, and you've seen that obviously with Donald Trump. How does the panel think that we should address these challenges at an international level?
It was particularly globalization. You were concerned about how the issues raised by globalization, exploited to a degree by Donald Trump, might be addressed. That was it, Gerard,
yes.
Wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. Can you hear me, Alistair? I'm sorry, I don't know whether I broke up there.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, that is essentially the nub of the question.
And there was another question about world order and structures that have been devalued in recent years by the United States withdrawal. And it's a question of whether now, looking not only at Britain's role in the world, but others, in particular the United States, will there be a chance to re-engage those? But the specific issue of globalization, the imbalances that it's created, that sense that the gap between rich and poor has widened, the inequalities of the world that's been seized on, the left behind to a degree. What chance now of addressing that with new opportunities, both for Europe and for the United States? And it gives a chance for each of you just to give a concluding feel of hope and optimism, I hope, as we sail forward. Who wants to kick off? Tom, you're full of hope and optimism.
I am. Actually, I am full of hope and optimism. Look, I think we're going through one of those moments in life where changes in technology and communications are exposing different issues, but actually likely to rebalance them more capably than we've been able to in the past. If you look at the way that technology has empowered communities around the world, I think we are on the point of having a major revolution in manufacturing and in communications. Now, quite what that will mean for everyone is very hard to predict, but I do think there's an awful lot of opportunity. And I think we've got to be careful about predicting that we're all going to go down purely specialized, globalized, we're very, very specialist niche production. Because one of the things that COVID has taught us is that robustness, resilience is incredibly useful and rather incredibly important. And so you do need a little bit of fat on the bone. Because if you don't, when you have these stresses, when globalization is hit by a pandemic or by whatever it may be, it could be a volcano next time. I mean, who knows? Then we will find ourselves unable to respond. So I think there's a combination of hope and looking again at the efficiency metrics that have so dominated the sort of 1980s and 90s.
Thanks, Tom, very much. Neale, or William, did you want to come in? And then Neale, last word? Neale first, and then William can wrap it up.
Yeah, no, thanks. This is a great question, and it's one that's really become crystallized in the last 2 years. And terms like globalization has become a dirty word, whereas really it should, and free trade have become dirty notions. And I think it's something that challenges the great big intergovernmental and supranational organizations like we've been speaking of, be it the UN, be it the WTO, be it the European Union. And there's a great phrase, obviously we all live by it, that a rising tide lifts all boats, but it doesn't lift the boat that has a massive hole in it. And we have to be able to show both in our own countries and wider around the world that we're prepared to plug those holes. How are we going to use, and this is something that comes back to the core belief in Christian democracy, that we believe in enterprise and reward, but we have to have that level of social fairness and social justice, that we will provide the return, that it's a success for everyone. And this is particularly when you look at places like America or Central and Eastern Europe or across the world, where it's very easy to blame something else, blame a foreign entity, blame Brussels, blame whoever it is, without showing the return. And it's that tangible return. It's not talking about GDP growth, because the GDP growth doesn't matter to someone who's on minimum wage that can't afford their rent and can't afford their groceries. And that is the great challenge for parties like ours. We have to cater for everyone, and we have to show that that ideology and that belief in multilateralism is true. And it was easier, I suppose, at a time when you had communism as the counterbalance, but now we have populist nationalists as the counterbalance. And we have to show that that negative level of politics, wherever it is in the world, doesn't work, that it may provide short-term relief, like kicking the cat does, but at the end of the day, you just end up without having a cat. You have to make sure that we do that. And that is the biggest challenge for Western liberal democracy. It's not going to be solved in a 4-year American presidential term. It's not going to be solved by a referendum, but it is going to be solved by more people realizing that the retail politics that got us all elected to politics, into parliament at various stages first, all comes back to these wider things. And we have to be able to translate that to the average Joe on the street.
Thanks. William?
Well, I am more positive in the light of recent events, including Joe Biden's election, but I think that 2020s is likely to be an extraordinary decade of innovation, technological innovation, much more so than the last 20 or 30 years, because of the pandemic, because of great power rivalry, which is usually, historically speaking, a spur to innovation. And because so many of the new technologies of the last 20, 30 years are about to converge and cross-fertilize each other. So there's 3 big drivers of a huge acceleration in innovation. That means you can't turn away from a global economy, or you'll miss out on all of that. But it also means education and skills is the single most important issue. And there will be no leveling up, there will be no addressing inequality, there will be no keeping up with global innovation without major improvements in education and skills. And Boris Johnson is onto that in his recent speech, but the question is, are we going to put sufficient weight and resources behind that? To me, that's the biggest question of all, and it affects our ability in foreign policy, just as our domestic prosperity.
William, thank you very much indeed. We've come to the end of what has been an all too brief hour, but let me just wrap it up if I may. Firstly, to the well over 100 participants who've been there, to thank all of you for being on. To the NHS doctor who tried to get his question in, it was very specific on an issue. The NHS will face challenges going forward in terms of those who will be coming to work in it from elsewhere. There's no doubt about that. And the NHS commitment to solving the problem of the pandemic has been enormous. And I didn't want you to feel that your question hadn't been noted, but this is not necessarily the forum in which that would have got the answer. But to say to the panelists, thank you for joining us. To say to the contributors to the paper is now widely available, but I want to thank each and every one of them who've made a contribution. And that's Andrew Woodcock, Nicholas McLean, Charles Tannock, who co-edited with me and did so much work on it, Garvin Walsh, Jeremy Lefroy, Dina Black, Ivan Butucharov, Lola Faseo, Matthew Schlachter, and Saj Karim. Thank you so much to all those authors and distinguished colleagues, know their business, who put their heart and soul into this. To thank David Lidington for encouraging the paper and getting it out there. Although the paper is a snapshot of where things are at the moment, it will be added to, because these days you don't have to raise funds to get another pamphlet. All of us on this panel remember those happy days and launch it with warm wine at some evening when you're wondering how to pay for the costs. It's online. We'll update it as and when events occur, so keep it current with a great bunch of authors. So thank you for that. To do a little bit of CGE parish notices, the next CGE meeting will be held on Monday, the 16th of November at 5, and David Lidington will be discussing the future of Europe with Alex Stubb, the former Prime Minister of Finland. If you wish to attend, please sign up via the CGE website. And I think that's all we needed to do. But once again, thank you. A star-studded panel. William Hain, Tom Tugendhat, Neale Richmond, under the leadership of David Lidington. You can't get much better than that, and I think our participants demonstrated that. The world is a long way to go, but it was great to end with a note of optimism from 3 guys who not only know a bit about it, but are actually responsible for a part of that. And to all who've been listening, particularly those from outside the UK, Elmar Brock has just messaged. Elmar, David McAllister, and so many others. Thank you so much. We're still here, and we're still going to be close. And I think this panel has just emphasised that. So unless, David, you had any final goodbye to mention? Shaking his head. Can I just say thanks very much to everyone for joining, and look forward to you staying involved with CGE as time goes on. Thank you very much indeed.